Please open your book up back to page 10 as we will begin reading where we left off. In Atlanta, the travelers divided, boarding two separate buses. Their fear mounted as they approached the Alabama state line. Alabama and Mississippi were the most rigidly segregated states in the South. In both states, the Ku Klux Klan held tremendous power. Klan members believed that the white race should reign supreme. African Americans who dared to question the white authority were routinely beaten and even killed. As the bus pulled into the station at Anniston, Alabama, a screaming crowd rushed forward. Klansmen seized the black Freedom Riders and flung them toward seats in the back. Flying stones shattered the windows. Someone began to slash the tires. The buses pulled back into the highway and tried to speed away. 6 miles beyond Anniston, the damaged tires forced one bus to a stop, and the mob caught up with it again. This time, someone hurled a firebomb through a rear window. The bus filled with smoke. Choking and terrified, the passengers scrambled for the doors. As the last people jumped off the ground, the bus became engulfed in flames. The second bus drove to Birmingham. That city has such a reputation for violence against blacks that many blacks called it Bombingham. A mob surrounded the bus as it pulled into Birmingham station. Men dragged the Freedom Riders to the pavement, battering them with clubs and lead pipes. One of the Freedom Riders, James Peck, had to have 50 stitches to close the gashes on his head. Another member of the group, William Barbie, received such a severe head injuries that he remained paralyzed for the rest of his life. Birmingham Police Chief Eugene Bull Connor was a notorious champion of white supremacy. He looked the other way and let the mob do as it pleased. Later, when asked why no police had arrived to intervene, he replied that it was Mother's Day. All of the men on the force were at home having dinner with their mothers. With their pledge of nonviolence, the Freedom Riders were defenseless. They tried to flee. They attempted to protect one another with their bodies, but they did not lift a hand against their attackers. That night, television viewers across America saw the flailing clubs and the bloody faces of Freedom Riders who refused to return violence for violence. After the attacks in Anniston and Birmingham, the Freedom Ride came to a halt. The bus companies refused to carry the Freedom Riders any further, arguing that they could not continue to put their vehicles in jeopardy. But civil rights leaders feared that defeat would set a dangerous precedent. If the protesters appeared to give in to the violence would go on and on. Almost overnight, civil rights activists in Nashville sent another group of Freedom Riders to Birmingham. Before their journey began, President John F. Kennedy sent John Siegenthaler, a Justice Department aide, to meet with Alabama Governor John Patterson. Siegenthaler insisted that all passengers, black and white, must have equal access to interstate transportation. Later, he described the governor's reaction to reporters. "I'm going to tell you something," Patterson had roared. "The people of this country are so tired of the mamby-bamby that's in Washington. It's a disgrace. There's nobody in the whole country that's got a spine to stand up to those Negroes except me." Eventually, Governor Patterson reluctantly agreed to let state troopers escort a bus carrying Freedom Riders from Birmingham to Montgomery. There would even be a helicopter patrol watching from the sky. Yet, when he explained the plan to the press, Patterson added, "We don't tolerate rabble-rousers and outside agitators." On May 20th, 21 Freedom Riders set out from Birmingham. Some of the original 13 had returned, including a 21-year-old black divinity student named John Lewis. The 90-mile trip was remarkably peaceful. Some of the Freedom Riders even dozed in their seats. But just as the bus reached Montgomery, the helicopter and the state troopers suddenly vanished. Years later, Lewis remembered arriving at the bus stop depot. It was eerie, just as a strange feeling. It was so quiet, so peaceful, nothing, and the moment we stared down the steps of that bus, there was an angry mob. People came out of nowhere. Men, women, children with baseball bat clubs, chains, and there was no police official around. They just started beating people. President Kennedy's aide, John Siegenthaler, pulled up in a car just as the attack began. He tried to assist a young black man who was being struck by several whites, but when Siegenthaler urged her to escape into his car, she refused. "Mister, this is not your fight," she told him. I'm nonviolent. Don't get hurt because of me. Moments later, someone struck Siegenthaler on the head with a lead pipe. When the crowd disappeared at last, the parking lot looked like a battlefield. The pavement was spattered with blood. Siegenthaler and another man lay on the ground unconscious, and many more people were cut and dazed. Nearly a half hour passed before help arrived. The next evening, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. flew to Montgomery. A Baptist minister from Atlanta, Dr. King was the most prominent and widely respected leader in the civil rights movement. He was a gifted speaker who had won thousands of Americans to the civil rights cause, and he was deeply committed to the principle of nonviolence. Federal marshals stood outside as King addressed a rally at Montgomery's First Baptist Church. As he spoke of freedom and equality, another angry mob gathered. The mob surrounded the church, trapping King and hundreds of his supporters inside. As the hours passed, their terror mounted. If the marshals could not control the mob, someone might set a fire to the church, and they would all perish in the blaze. To stem the rising panic, King quoted a song that had become the anthem of the civil rights movement. "We are not afraid," he told the crowd in the church, "and we shall overcome." Finally, Attorney General Robert Kennedy ordered Governor Patterson to declare martial law in Alabama. State police and Alabama National Guard helped the federal marshals break up the mob. At 4 a.m., King and the others were free to leave the church. The Freedom Ride was still not over. On May 27th, more than 3 weeks after the first bus had left Washington, 27 Freedom Riders boarded a bus in Montgomery. As James Farmer glanced down the rows of seats, he noticed that many of the young men and women were fervently writing farewell notes to their parents, brothers, and sisters. This would be the most perilous leg of the journey. In Mississippi, they could truly be on enemy soil. Yet this time there was no bloodshed. Instead of a raging mob, dozens of uniformed policemen waited at the bus terminal in Jackson, Mississippi. With chilling efficiency, the officers herded the Freedom Riders through the whites-only waiting room and into paddy wagons outside. Before they even knew what was happening, the Freedom Riders were arrested for breaking state segregation laws. The next day, they were tried and sentenced to 60 days in the state penitentiary. The Freedom Riders never reached New Orleans, but their courage and dedication inspired thousands of other Americans. Over the next 4 years, wave after wave of men and women, black and white, young and old, swept into the South to work with the civil rights movement. Some helped African Americans register to vote. Others taught farm workers to read and write. Still, others introduced children to African American history or marched to protest political injustice. Wherever they went, they were known as Freedom Riders. After the first Freedom Rides of 1961, civil rights leaders shifted their concerns from the integration of public facilities to a quest for political power. Unless they could vote, African Americans would never be first-class citizens. Once they won the power of the ballot, elected officials would have to respond to their needs.